Hello and welcome to VistaTalks, where we have interesting discussions with very interesting people from all across the world. I'm your host for today, Simon Hodgkins, and it's a real delight to introduce to you Alex Zekakis. Alex is the Chief Customer Officer at XTM International, the CCO, and he brings a unique blend of localization expertise, project management, and advanced technology insights. Today, we're going to take a little dive into the future localization, automation, and I'm sure the topic of AI might come up now and again when we're thinking about how businesses now expand internationally around the planet. So, Alex, you're very welcome to the show. Thanks for being a guest on VistaTalks today.
Thank you for having me, Simon. I appreciate the introduction as well. It's very good to be here. And I look forward to a conversation with a bit of AI talk as well, right? As it tends to be the norm nowadays.
I think it's against the law to have a conversation without AI now. Pretty sure that's the case. Well, Alex, look, you probably better than most have seen firsthand the transformation of localization over many years at this stage. And the key question I want to kick us off with is, from your perspective, what do you see as the biggest challenges companies face today when they're trying to implement this global, going local, localization type strategy? And of course, if you want to weave into how XTM and the work you guys do help address some of these challenges, maybe feel free to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question. And I know after being in the industry for more than 15 years myself, at this point we're in, at this juncture, at these crossroads, you come to a bit of a realization. There's a certain frame that needs to be probably established, right? If we go back in time, you would have major players, so Fortune 500 or companies of that size, that caliber, actually bothering with localization or globalization. Nowadays, it's every company. Doesn't really matter. Maybe it's a one-man show, and they still have the tools, the means, and the necessity to localize or globalize even their content, right? So oftentimes what is observed is that you have businesses that are still, kind of like getting their footing in the world. And one of the first things they try to do is localize. And obviously that is extremely challenging. Localization is not easy, right? In any possible way, there's complexity surrounding it. And I feel that sometimes it's being looked at, with a bit of that lens and that perspective of being something easily attainable because, let's do AI or anything around that, right? So I feel that many businesses are faced with a certain challenge on that level. And that is only, I would say, reinforced by the fact that we are in a very volatile economic environment at the moment, right? Businesses that attempt to localize of any size, let's go beyond just the smaller businesses there, have changed with continuous changes in strategy, right? They have to adapt all the time to their business objectives, and these might change as well. For example, many businesses decide to withdraw from Russia a couple of years back, right? So suddenly, obviously, that has a major impact to any localization strategy, right? Because that becomes a locale that is no longer being addressed for those businesses, right? So obviously, the operational model or the company strategy affected the localization strategy as well. So my point is, it's extremely volatile and adaptive. Somebody has to be very adaptive at the moment, right? And that's where a TMS like XTM comes in, right? Now, if you put XTM in place, what you get is a system that actually kind of deals with all the clicks, if you may, right? It takes care of the execution of the day-to-day work and effectively promotes a lights out strategy, which puts your project managers, localization managers, whoever it is in a position to be able to look into the strategy, to look into the overarching, picture and decide how to best approach localization, process data, and make informed decisions about the future as well, right? Otherwise, I think that if you are kind of like in a no tech stack environment, everything is extremely manual. So you have to focus on that piece rather than look holistically around what you need to do in order to be successful, right? So I guess that's kind of like the way I look at it now. And I think that's a major challenge for many companies out there, that they have to embark on localization first off, and they don't really know what it is about. And even the ones that know what it is about are faced with the fact that everything changes on a pretty constant basis at this point in time, right? So TMS really makes a dent there.
I appreciate your insights because you've raised a couple of really good points there. Number one is the world goes from opportunity to chaos and back again in the flick of a day. News is changing, political borders are changing, conflicts change, even presidents change, I believe, at this point of recording, at least. So, in terms of technology, because you're kind of touching on that, then, you're talking about a TMS, you're talking a little bit about what XTM does there. And I know you and the team, you use technology in this smart way to help people deal with some of those changes, some of that chaos. Sometimes changes are forced on us. Companies are growing, they're launching new products or services into new geographies. They need to maybe go international faster than they would have thought they needed to. And sometimes they have a bit of a skills gap or a knowledge gap in that space. But when I think about things like, that sort of positioning now of XTM Cloud, XTRF, and other technologies that you have, and of course, let's bring it up, AI, machine
Mhm.
learning, and the impact that that's having on everybody in the localization industry. What role do you think the technology is playing now in enhancing that translation management? And importantly, the language quality, because we hear very different sides of the coin when it comes to AI and language quality, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great point and a great way of placing that question as well. I think we need to backtrack a bit, right? Our industry is no stranger to AI. I think that's always something I try to remind myself and also people I engage with on this topic when I'm asked the obvious question, do you do AI? And I've heard that exact question being placed, which I find extremely interesting as a possible response. But truth is that ever since I started, even before that, there's been AI, right? We probably are one of the pioneers, if you may, in terms of utilizing artificial intelligence one way or another to achieve our objectives, right? Globalization, enhance time to market, reduce cost, and at the same time secure quality. Machine translation, natural language processing, right, have always been in place and on a production level as well. So again, like nothing new. However, we recognize we're at a crossroads now, right? So there's been a tremendous technological leap. It's no longer just an advancement; it's an entire leap forward in terms of the capabilities that AI brings to the table, right? And I think in every such event, a certain degree of disruption and a bit of panic as well is to be expected, right? But when the dust settles, and I think we're coming to that point of the hype kind of curve going away, we take a deep breath and you realize what the status quo actually is, and as it stands now, I think beyond the basics of pure translation work, which is what we've been doing for a pretty long time for machine translation, we see AI affecting surrounding, if you may, areas to translation as well, or supporting processes like quality evaluation, right? There's automated quality evaluation or AI-driven quality evaluation at this point in time. Big topic in the industry at the moment, right? Or automated or AI-driven post-editing, right? So kind of use AI to validate AI, if you may. So people have gone beyond the limits of what was previously considered as the pinnacle of our achievement, which was to allow a machine to translate instead of humans, right? And find ways to add that on other layers. And the way I see it, that's only going to evolve, right? There's so many players, there's so many actors, if you may, in the whole process of localization, from project managers, quality managers, language specialists, tons of possible roles, and localization engineers, for example, right? And so many people that are involved that I would be surprised if we don't start seeing more and more of AI capabilities being added to all these different roles as well, right? Be it to support PMs, for example, to enhance lights out strategies, be it to automate engineering work, whatever it could be, parser creation or anything along those lines, right? So again, as it stands now, I see a lot of focus having shifted from the pure craft of translation to machines, right, to evaluating their output and the quality piece of it being evaluated on a constant basis on a high level as well, right? If we are there yet, I'm not the one to answer that. More people that are using it, I think there's still room for improvement, as with anything, obviously, right? But again, the leap is pretty obvious, right? Within a short span of less than 2 years, we've seen tremendous new functionality being added to the localization cycle, right?
No, 100%. And you're kind of talking earlier about the people trying to organize things maybe with a low tech stack or even no tech stack, and how pretty much impossible that is at this stage, and bringing the tools in that can help you. But then you're also now talking about how when we take a step back and we get away from the AI hype cycle, you kind of realize that people in the localization industry have really been pioneering the use of, as you say, natural language processing, AI, machine translation, neural machine translation for quite some time at this stage. And that's an important point to remember. And I want to bring it back to customers if I can, Alex, because I know in your role as CCO, you're sort of the chief, the person that's responsible to make sure your customers are happy, I'm sure. Um, and my question is this: because companies are now investing in localization, in tools, they're working with partners, whether it's a localization service provider like VistaTalks, whether it's somebody like XTM as well in that partnership. Um, when you're talking to your customers, do you get into this conversation about how do they actually measure the success of their localization efforts? Are you guiding or having deep discussions about specific key performance indicators, how people should be measuring the outcomes of the work that they do in this area? And how do they sort of, we often hear um, this argument that maybe sometimes localization can be seen as a cost center, as opposed to moving it up the value chain, getting it onto the C-suite agenda as something that actually drives revenue, actually helps strategy, actually drives the bottom line profits of a company.
Yeah. So I think one of the bigger impacts of AI these last 2 years, and that's becoming extremely evident anybody you talk with, is that it's brought eyes upon localization. I think we were kind of like a nice kept secret for many, many years. Nobody cared about us. We did our own thing. You had a localization manager, for example, on the enterprise side and their team. And then beyond their team, nobody even bothered thinking about translation as a principle. And now suddenly everybody's focused on it, right? There's scrutiny, there's teams affected by this in positive sometimes ways, but mostly negative ways. I think we've seen news in recent past over 2024 and even a bit before that of teams being effectively terminated en masse, localization teams being removed and people deciding that they go the whole 100% AI route with questionable outcome at the end of the day. We get to see the outcome of that exercise, but there's definitely a lot more focus on it. Therefore, and of course we work with our customers in that what is becoming extremely paramount is to prove value, right? That's the word in capital letters that comes out of this. You can call it return of investment, you can call it KPIs, but by definition it's the value of the investment. Everybody's going to think about that moment you're going to go ask money as a local manager and say, hey, you know what, I want to buy a tech for 50 grand, whatever it is. The first question you're going to get is, who's accountable for it, right? Who's going to make sure that this actually delivers? And I don't think there's anything groundbreaking in terms of the KPIs that are being requested. We're looking at market growth, for example. Depending obviously on the product or service that you sell, you're looking at customer satisfaction, you're looking at product adoption rates, all kind of like per locale, of course, or kind of falling back into the localization process and the impact localization has as a revenue machine, right? Effectively, and you write about that, and I wholly agree with it, right? So there's ways to measure that. And obviously the team will need to measure their localization work as well, right? They will have to see how they improve over time, the quality, for example, or how costs are being reduced, right? How time to market accelerates. Because at the end of the day, nobody cares if you had the 95% score and from I don't know, edit distance calculation. What they care about when you report to them, how much money did we save? What's the actual return that came out of it? How much faster can we deliver? How improved is the satisfaction of our customers? That's all that matters at the end of the day from a business standpoint, right? So I see that within our customer base, there's a lot of focus on that now because everybody, and that's a difference to the past, everybody's trying to prove their value, right? To make sure that they become sticky, that their program isn't going to be sunset, that people realize that there's value in the work that they're doing and the people they have in place, but also the technology that they've invested in, right? So that keyword comes around and around and around and around all the time, right? So at the end of the day, what we will typically engage in is to define objectives very closely with our customers, right? In terms of what their investment should bring, right? And monitor that throughout our life cycle together. But then also very importantly, and that's probably my own nuance in terms of how I perceive customer service, drive mutual accountability towards those objectives, right? So our customer will always hold us accountable to delivering the technology that they're looking for, right? That they've been promised or they've been, kind of like contracted or we've contracted to deliver to them. But then we also hold them accountable to do their piece in order to reach those objectives, right? And that's, in my point of view, the customer service that everybody needs nowadays, not necessarily wants, but needs in order to get to the ultimate objective, which is value, right? As I mentioned before. So definitely an interesting period of time in terms of how this has evolved dramatically and the necessity to be on top of your data at this point in time.
Yeah, I love that. And I really like, regardless of who you partner with, but driving that mutual accountability is so important now. And of course, you're right to emphasize, whether people call it a KPI like I did, but ultimately what we're talking about is value, aren't we? What's the value proposition here?
Mhm.
How is it helping? And also very interesting that you mentioned about how, some teams are being let go, downsized, projects being sunsetted, that turmoil again, I suppose. And it leads me nicely on to a question I want to ask you about leadership next, because as the chief customer officer, you are having to combine technology, language expertise, but also project management skills, people skills. And in the context that we're talking about today, are there any sort of particular leadership principles that you think are crucial, maybe more today than they've ever been, when it comes to driving the teams in this tech driven, needing to prove value, culturally diverse field like the localization world we see today?
100%. And I think leadership skills have always been around certain things, certain values in the past, right? You have accountability, you have high performing teams, you have that constant, top grading, for example, that many businesses undergo. You have object oriented mindsets, typically things you would expect from a leader. But I think one particular skill set which has, kind of grown tremendously, and I don't think gets as much attention as it should, is social empathy, right? Now, the practice of empathy and that being embedded in one's leadership style has tremendous impact, right? At this point in time, for example, if you'll have to make certain tough decisions, it's inevitable. Everybody makes decisions that are difficult at times, especially when they affect people, right? And they can be detrimental to the morale of the business as well. They can be detrimental to the actual service that the business delivers, right? But at the end of the day, if empathy comes into the mix and everything is being done with that kind of like as the angle, then even the most difficult decisions can have controlled outcome, right? You will find that through empathy, you can get actually support from the teams if they understand the reasons, if they understand the why, if they understand that this is not like blind execution or anything along those lines, right? If we talk about a difficult, choice, difficult decision, then their support continues as well throughout these motions, right? And especially in localization, I've come to make that experience on a very frequent basis that the service delivered on top of any technological offering is extremely important and paramount, even to the decision making of which technology will be invested in, right? And I kind of guess it goes hand in hand. That's why I mentioned empathy, because if your team is motivated, right, and there can be other contributors to that as well. Don't misunderstand me, right? I know pay scale and many other things chip into that, but when people are satisfied, they're going to deliver good service. When they stand behind their leaders, they're going to deliver a good service, right? And obviously that can affect, the growth of your business, can affect your sales, can affect your entire positioning in the market, right? And the way that your competitors or even potential buyers perceive you as an entity and as a business, as a function. On top of that, I think the general practice of social empathy also becomes an umbrella for three of the most important words right now in the world: diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So these kind of like become embedded as principles within the organization. So if they happen organically as part of the day-to-day business function and they're not forced, in any way, through the idea of having empathetic leadership, then they can also deliver the value, right? And that again elevates any business's position in the world, right? Outside and inside of localization, it doesn't matter. And I think we've seen some incredible examples of extremely powerful empathy out there and extremely poor empathy as well that led to the opposite results that people were expecting, right? So if I would take one, that would be it. There's probably a long list of skills that you need in order to be an impactful leader nowadays, but that's the one that has made a tremendous difference in the last few years for me.
It's such a good point. Thank you so much indeed for sharing that, Alex. And particularly at this point in time, it seems to be a critical leadership skill.
Yeah.
When it comes to the work that you do as well, integration plays a part in it, doesn't it? Because I know at XTM, you integrate with lots of tools and platforms, and that's really important for your customers. And at VistaTech, they would be very proud of being sort of technology agnostic. But when it comes to a certain level of integration benefiting customers, when they're trying to go global, when they're going international, when they're, venturing into these new markets, how does XTM make sure that you are meeting the evolving needs of the business? Because we were talking earlier, weren't we, about the fact that it's constantly changing now.
Yep. So first thing, obviously, that I need to mention and to agree with you as well is that integrations, connectors, whatever we want to call them, are mission critical. A technology like a TMS, like XTM, without integrations, true direct integrations, end-to-end integrations with any source system, um, obviously makes the tool far less impactful, even unusable in cases, right? So a connector, for example, not working for a day might at times be equally impactful to the entire system not working for a day, right? People rely on these automations, these integrations to deliver the value that we mentioned before as well. And sometimes the quality output, even time to market and cost, will be affected by integration capabilities, right? So for example, if you take like a big source content management system and that doesn't integrate directly and you have to kind of go to a manual process, your time to market and cost will just go through the roof, right? They will skyrocket pretty much right away. So I think that connectors are paramount, right? And the ROI that they deliver is extremely visible, extremely fast as well, and it has a much higher impact than a whole blown system. Like a whole blown system will take time to pay off, right? It's an expensive investment, so it's more of a maybe multi-year task, depending, of course, on many factors. The connector's value, probably integration value, comes within days or weeks even. It's just such a major differentiator to, if we compare to, of course, a fully manual process before that, it just changes everything radically, right? So when it comes to us, we obviously have a lot of integrations already with different tools. And as anything that we do, prioritization, but also design of our connectors is based on demand and customer input as well, right? So we don't just create connectors for the sake of creating them. Our customers drive and tell us what they need to see next, which systems are actually in demand for them. And obviously we work through that and we prioritize accordingly, right? So it is kind of like a hand in hand, exercise with our customer base to identify not only which systems we should be integrating with, but also how, right? Because that also a major difference here. There are simple connections like just submit some files, and then there's far more complex integrations that allow you to undertake more complex operations as well, right? Depending on the objective, the purpose, right? And I think one of the important aspects of approaching it that way is that by involving our customers, we ensure that we are seeing eye to eye, if you may, on the expectations as well. But we also, again, drive that mutual accountability that I mentioned before, which is probably one of the most important pieces of any customer-centric business, right? Again, it's not about, sugarcoating things or always smiling or always showing the customer, hey, you're great, you're doing fantastic. No, it's about telling them, hey, you know what? Here, you need a connector for X system. This is the spec that we kind of worked on together, and we deliver this, and they're gonna get into the mode where they understand that their investment has a very particular outcome as well. This is what they should expect. So they hold us accountable to, ensure that this is what we're going to be delivering to them, but we hold them accountable to also realizing early on what they actually need from that system. And these can change over time. There's new things being added and whatnot, but at least on the first basic level, there needs to be that clear alignment between the two parties as to what exactly is the outcome going to be, right? So I think for me, automation and integration is probably, and I dare say, more important than AI. Maybe somebody shoots me for that, but I guess my point is that it's a baseline, right? It's a stepping stone. Without that, many other functionalities don't even make sense, to be fair.
It's a great point, and you're kind of talking about two things there, which is simplicity on one hand, meaning that without the connectors, you're not going to be able to grow in the way that you want to grow, and a customer needs to be able to use the connector and for it to be functional and to do what
Mhm.
they need it to do. But then there's the sophistication part, which is all connectors aren't equal. Some need to be quite bespoke, quite different, and to be able to perform various activities. And I think it's great the way that you've positioned that. And look, it brings me nicely on to sort of the last thing I want to ask you today, which is as we look ahead, we have to look ahead. I don't know how you're going to answer this next question without going down an AI rabbit hole, but we will see. Um, there are obviously trends that are currently shaping the localization industry. We've mentioned quite a few of them here today. And whether that is AI or machine translation or the next iteration of products and services. But how are you preparing? How are you looking ahead? What's your company doing? What do you think is the future of the industry? And how do you go about even preparing for that? Because it seems to be going through a radical period in time right now.
Yeah, it definitely is, right? And most probably, if we would sit here and make that, 5-year projection, we would both be wrong. Most probably at the end of the day, with what we expect to happen, how fast it will happen, right, and how the outcome is going to look like at the end. But I'll try and take a stab at it, right, from a more um, company directive or approach from that standpoint, right? So I think we've set ourselves up for success by setting up a very strong team that works on AI capabilities, right? So we have newly appointed leadership in our product with extended experience also in the domain of AI, right? Having done this thing before and having gone through this process before helps tremendously. We have a research team that is highly educated, highly skilled. They've been around for quite some time and always trying to innovate on various layers and various levels as well, right? Again, not just focusing on one piece, but really tapping into all the possible AI capabilities. And that becomes our funnel effectively for the things we want to push out there, right? What we want to start seeing in our product, in our solution, what we already have in our product, in our products in general, right? As a whole. And I think we've taken a very logical approach here to that AI hype. We're assessing the actual value that these features bring to the customers rather than just spitting AI. Well, I go to conferences quite often, and what surprised me this year is that I didn't see a single banner, so more than 2 sentences out there that didn't contain the word AI, right? We do AI this, we do AI that, and that's great. I love that people go in that direction of trying things out, but on a product level, on a commercial level, simply, I don't know, prompt engineering something into your solution doesn't make it AI powered, doesn't make it AI ready, right? And the thing is that everybody's kind of excited, the hype cycle we were discussing before. So initially everybody jumps board, and then at some point you have to see the value as well. If you don't have value, you have nothing, right? And I think that's our approach, which makes tremendous sense to me as well, is that logical approach to, if we deliver a feature, what's the value going to be to our customers? How do we measure that outcome, right? And that means that features that we actually produce, generate, deploy out there make sense to our customers, again, in alignment with them, right? We kind of review things with many of our customers as well. Um, and if I would kind of like put my finger in the air and kind of guess what's going to happen, it kind of goes to something I mentioned before. I think we're reaching our limits as to what we can do with pure translation work, right? Machine translation has already been extremely effective in the past, right? And a major cost saver for many business, but also accelerator in terms of delivery times for translation content. It also enabled businesses to translate previously untranslatable content, user generated content, for example, that was never subject to any human translating. That would have been a massive cost for any business to do, right? So that's kind of reaching a certain limit in terms of what we can still expect there. But everything around that is opening up. We talked a bit about the quality assessment. We talked a bit about the automated or AI-driven post editing. I'm going to extend that to project management. going to extend it to QA engineers, to log engineers, to anything, right? So just recently, I think one of the major players out there, I believe it was Anthropic, released the capability that AI can control software, for example, now, right? So really mouse click around an actual piece of software. Now imagine that somehow coming into the mix as a PM support function, right? So the project manager is no longer the clicker, they're the thinker, and something actually clicks for them based on their intelligence, based on the input they've provided. So many possible doors to open there. I think there's limitless capabilities, but again, like everything has to have value, right? Shiny, sure, looks fantastic, sure, sounds good, amazing. But at the end of the day, we're going to go back to that KPIs discussion we had earlier, that question, right? Somebody will have to be accountable. I'm investing 20, 30, 60 grand on something. What am I getting back for this, right? And I know initially it sounds like it's going to change the world, but does it at the end of the day? I think there's so many things in AI that do, and I use it on a personal basis on a daily basis, actually myself. But not everything is as powerful as it might seem in the beginning, right?
I think it's a great point for us to end on because, you know, technology changes constantly. It's always evolving. But for you to bring it back to that word value, I think is the critical piece here. It's almost as though you're asking, and what does that mean? And how does that help?
Right.
Rather than us getting carried away. And I loved what you said as well about, being at a conference lately and every banner has the word AI on it, and it's so true. And we can get carried away in what you were describing as the next shiny object, the next thing to pull our attention away. But ultimately, I think what you are championing loudly is, yeah, but what's the value add? How is
Yeah.
it adding value? And I think it's such a great point to end on. So thank you so much indeed, Alex, for spending some time with me here on this Vista Talks episode. I want to thank our audience around the world for either watching or listening to this episode of Vista Talks. And I hope that they'll join me again for some more interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world, just like Alex. But thank you, Alex. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you again today.
Been great being here, Simon. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and thanks for raising the right questions, I would say, in terms of what matters for hopefully people to hear about an opinion on, but also what's actually on people's mind within the industry, right? And we see that all over the place. These are the key areas that everybody focuses on at the moment. It was great. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Alex.